Welcome, Mr. Kenny Weiss. Thank you very much for taking your time. And I appreciate very much that I have the opportunity to sit down with you and discuss narcissism. It is a big topic. It is also a trend at the time, definitely. At the same time, there is a true core to the trend. The narcissistic personality disorder leads to suffering. People in the perimeter suffer heavily. There is a very clear difference between the narcissistic personality disorder, pathological narcissism, and the mainstream term narcissism. Let's get right into it. Kenny, what is the biggest difference? What is very important for people to understand when looking at narcissism? What is the difference between the trend narcissism, somebody maybe a James Bond, and an individual with the narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, the biggest confusion I've seen in the industry is there's a lack of understanding of codependency. And this is what's creating the greatest confusion is most people have only been educated about one side of codependence, which is the typical disempowered, what we think is the needy. They're very pleasing oriented. They give themselves away. They might even call themselves an empath or something like that. What people don't realize is there's a polar opposite side of the codependence scale, what's called the falsely empowered. And they look almost exactly like a narcissist. And people were vastly undereducated about codependence. We're all codependent, and it's a scale or a spectrum, and people are further out on the disempowered or further out on the falsely empowered, and the falsely empowered literally has the exact same traits. The difference, I did a video on this, the difference between the falsely empowered codependent and the narcissist. One thing to recognize with the narcissist is, I use an analogy. If you know America, and you know the weather in Colorado, it has 4 distinct seasons. So it has a true winter, a true spring, a true summer, a true fall. And so those periods can last several months, but they always change. Well, then you go out to, Arizona or Nevada, the desert. It might rain once a year. It is basically the landscape and everything is always the same. Well, that's the difference is a narcissist is pretty much always in that position. Very, very rarely do they move out of that dysfunction. The codependent can look just like a narcissist and display, all these different subtypes, covert, overt, everything. And those are the seasons. Well, what you're primarily working with there is a falsely empowered codependent, someone who's grandiose, somebody who's all or nothing, black and white thinking. They're seeking outside or other esteem, which looks just like the narcissist. They're very walled off, shut down, detached. They can manipulate from, they usually start off a relationship as being very intense and very present for you, but then they, pull back behind their avoidance. And so unless somebody gets highly educated on codependence, and the only person I've ever heard teach on it is a lady named Pia Mellody. And it's my personal opinion that if somebody has not read Pia Melody's work, they don't know anything about codependence. And so most people are learning about codependence. Like I said, she's the only teacher I've ever seen. Everybody else just says this. And so they're missing that, wait a minute, what I'm dealing with is codependence, because narcissism itself is very, very rare. It's, really people who stuck. I mean, how should I say this? We all experience a narcissistic developmental stage in childhood. It's, usually around 2 to 4. It's healthy, it's normal. It's where we learn to individuate and become our own selves and learn how to pursue our life. Well, the narcissist gets stuck and they never leave that. And the falsely empowered, it's very similar. It's a disease of, codependence is a disease of intellectual and emotional immaturity. And so whether they are disempowered or falsely empowered, they're both stuck in childhood. And Pia Melody's book, Facing Codependence, to me is required reading. If you want to start to really understand, are you dealing with a narcissist or not? If you don't know about falsely empowered codependence, you're probably in most cases mislabeling somebody as a narcissist. And so that's the key distinction, is think of it like the weather. You might have several months of a certain behavior, but it's going to change. It's going to move in and out like Colorado. A narcissist is like the desert. It's almost the same all day, every day, days on end, years on end, with slight variation. And that's one way to start getting your arms around it. But again, the key is go learn about falsely empowered codependence. And Pia and myself are the only people I've ever seen teach about it. I have a ton of videos. I have videos about the difference, the clinical difference between the two, of a narcissist and a falsely empowered codependent. I've written about it in my books and stuff like that. So that's the first step, is I tell people, get educated on falsely empowered codependent before you label someone as a narcissist.
So when you say narcissism is very rare, what exactly do you mean with narcissism? What kind of narcissism? The characteristic, the personality characteristic of narcissism, the narcissistic personality disorder, pathological narcissism. What do you mean with narcissism?
It doesn't matter which pathology of narcissism you want to talk about. The inherent traits of a narcissist, of being a full-blown, in the desert, all day, every day, a narcissist, are rare, whichever pathology of narcissism you're talking about. And most often they have characteristics of narcissism, but what you're dealing with is a codependent that's moving through that scale of false empowerment and disempowerment. And so then people go, well, that's covert. Well, I lose track of, there's so many different terms now for narcissism, and I lose track of them all. But they'll go, well, there are all these kinds of narcissists. Well, what you're really experiencing most likely is somebody who's moving between the disempowered and falsely empowered codependent. And so it's just a lack of information on codependence that's creating a lot of the misunderstanding and everybody being labeled as a narcissist. I mean, I wouldn't disagree that with social media, that narcissism is on the rise. And the parenting style that's been promoted over the last half century throughout the world, it's on the rise. But it's not as what people are mostly experiencing is a deeper divide in the codependent scale, and they're confusing it with narcissism because of the lack of teaching about codependence.